Welcome to Part 5, Grant Writing for Schools. We're going to talk about completing the action plan or work plan today. And here's the disclaimer. Funding for this project was provided through a grant from Delta Dental of Arkansas in collaboration with the School-Based Health Alliance of Arkansas and Healthy Act of Arkansas. The information and opinions expressed by the author in this presentation do not necessarily represent the official views of Delta Dental, School-Based Health Alliance of Arkansas, and Healthy Act of Arkansas. So, all grant applications will require an action plan or a work plan. They kind of go hand in hand. Some of them call it an action plan, some of it call it a work plan. But this is an outline of the activities that you are going to do to meet the needs of your overall goal. These activities will focus on the objectives in meeting the goals. So you have your goal, and under your goal, you've got your objectives. And within your objectives, you have activities to meet your objectives. Most grant applications will ask you to provide a written summary of your work plan along with a template that can be completed to show all of the parts on one page for quick reference. So I'm going to talk about the parts, and then I have a couple of examples of two different templates to give you an idea. So, let me go back. So most of them will include, but will not be limited to showing what your goal is, what your objectives are, if you have more than one objective, what program activities you have planned to do in order to meet your objectives, who's going to be responsible for completing those, the projected numbers of individuals to reach with your activities, your completion date, any required resources you're going to need in order to do that activity, and what is your measure of accomplishment going to be for the activities. So these are the activities that are going to be required to do in order to meet your goals and objectives. Activities are outlined, what items that are going to be accomplished, so the reviewers can see your activities and see if these activities, by completing them, will support you completing the objectives. Your work plan should be in a sequential order so that the reviewer can understand the level of progression, and hopefully it's smooth and they understand where you're going. The program activities that require budget. So if you're providing a training and you need to purchase curriculum or any resources for that activity, if you have to purchase those, that should be reflected in your budget. The program activities should be your roadmap to implementing your grant to success. Who's responsible? This doesn't necessarily have to be a person's name. It could be a title, but somebody is going to have to be responsible for making sure that the activities are completed on time. And that includes making sure the activity is set up and you have all the components in place, all the resources are in place in order for it to be successful. Someone who's responsible for making sure that everything's completed, and that person should know what's expected of them and should obtain the necessary information and data as needed for record keeping. So that person is also going to be responsible for keeping up with collected data so that you can, so that they can show the level of accomplishment in meeting the evaluation needs. If somebody else has written the grant and they have identified somebody who's going to be responsible for any activities, they need to make sure that that person responsible for the activities knows that they're responsible for completing those activities. So there has to be some pretty good communication going on in order to get this completed appropriately. Numbers reached. When you write a grant application, there's no way of knowing for sure total numbers. So you're really it's a projected number. So within reason, do a projection of, we hope to reach up to a certain number. I found it easier to write my projected numbers by saying up to, whether it's I'm going to provide up to 5 workshops, I'm going to reach up to 125 teachers. That way it doesn't limit me to a certain number. If I say I'm going to reach 125 teachers and I don't, then that doesn't look good. So if I reach up to 125, I can, whatever my number is, I've reached my goal. Again, you know, if I say up to 5 professional development trainings, if I could only do 3 because of time restraints or financial restraints, I still met my goal because I could do up to 5. Now, if I go over that, it's not going to hurt me, but you have a little more flexibility if you write your numbers to be like, we're going to reach up to a certain number, and that doesn't hurt you as much. Be careful that you don't over project. If you project you're going to reach 75% of your student body on something, that's pretty high. You got to be careful, because if you only get 25%, then that you really did not hit your mark. So be careful when you're projecting numbers or percentages of who you're going to reach or how many you're going to meet with this grant fund. So don't shoot yourself in the foot by projecting really high. Even if you think you can do it, be real cautious of your projection number. Your completion date, it's a proposed completion date. Again, things happen, from weather to whatever. But give yourself enough padding in that by, if you know that you're going to do a training or a presentation or whatever in maybe October, it's safe to say that by December 31st, we'll have completed this activity. And it's okay, because that gives you some space in case something happens and you have to reschedule something. So just because you propose a completion date doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do it on that date. So give yourself some room to be flexible. Provide plenty of room for adjustments in your timeline. I mean, it doesn't have to be, the reviewers are not going to be nitpicking in terms of, I don't think they can do that in 2 weeks. If you allow yourself plenty of time in that. So it's okay to give yourself some padding on the timeline to get it done, because your goal is to get it done and not worry about, if you set your goal for September 30th and there's no way you can do it until the end of November, it's not going to look good on your application. So be aware of your dates. Required resources. This is going to be really important with your budget. If you're going to do a training, let's say, you're obviously going to have to purchase resources, curriculum, materials. Sometimes you'll have to reserve a room. You may have to pay for some rental from a computer or overhead equipment. Those things need to be considered in your budget in order to pull off a training or something like that. So any of these resources that you need to think about. Am I going to need what resources? And make sure that you've got it covered, because if you need to rent a room at $1,000 a day at a hotel for a big training and you don't have that in your budget, your school or your agency is not going to come up with $1,000 to pay for that. So you need to think of all of the angles. What's it going to cost me to provide this training? What's it going to cost me to install these water fountains? Make sure you've got all your bases covered on that. if they're not covered in your action plan or your work plan and you put them in your budget, it's not going to be paid for. So you have to be real conscious of exactly what's going to happen and reflect that in your work plan. What is your measure of accomplishment going to be? All applications are going to have an evaluation plan of some sort. Sometimes it's a progress report. You have to show progress in if you met your goals. So you have to be able to show documentation of how you met your goal and objectives in the grant. What are those measures going to be? Do you have to have outcome or effectiveness evaluation measures? Sometimes they'll tell you what you need to do in the grant application. Were the intended improvements made in the target population? Can you show that your target population benefited from the intended improvements that you made? Do you have process evaluation measures that you can do? Did your program provide the data to show effectiveness of the program? Can you use that information for future activities? You know, what kind of evaluation is your application asking for? Make sure you have the right data collection to show the evaluation that you need. How can you measure the success of your program? Outcome evaluation with target audiences may include pre and post testing with the program implementation. Pre and post testing students that have been trained in a curriculum. Pre and post testing teachers in terms of before and after they implemented a program. Number of target audience participants completing the program. How many people were at your training? You can tell that by the registration list and a sign-in sheet for your participants. That's data documentation, and you need to keep those. Also, an agenda of the training day. Number of your people completing a professional development or training program implementation. So I trained 25 teachers to implement a program. My next step is to determine how many of those trained teachers are actually implementing the program with their students. So my evaluation would be an implementation survey to find out how they're doing it, what they're doing, what's working, what's not working. That's a level of evaluation. Target audience benefiting from the program implementation. Again, how many of the teachers are using it? A student survey sometimes can also tell how many of the target audience is benefiting from the program. A pre and a post test for students sometimes. Those are all good sources of data collection that can be turned in. Process evaluation helps to determine whether the program activities have been implemented as intended. Some of the things you can collect: who was the program target audience? What has the program done? When did the program activities take place? Where did the program activities take place? What were the barriers to the facilitators implementing of the program activities? And this will help us understand the process of how things were able to be implemented or not, and to make corrective actions from that and what we learned. So there's really this is a good piece of information to collect too, in order to make it better for future program implementations. Here's an example of a template that is used in grants. And as you can see, the project work plan, that would be like the title of your program, and then your goal statement. So you would list one goal statement, And for this one, you would list one objective. If you've got more than one objective for this goal, then you would print off an extra sheet of this, how many objectives you have. So here is an example of a completed template for one page. So the implementation of evidence-based sexual health education curriculum was the work plan title. The goal statement was to reduce the number of adolescent STD rates. The objective was to provide professional development opportunities. And so here are some of the program activities. These are not all of them, but here's some of the program activities to give you an example. So one of the activities would be secure a training facility, resources and materials in order to do a workshop, and then train teachers from XYZ schools in an evidence-based curriculum. So there's two activities right there. The numbers to be reached or grade level. So in here again, up to 45 classroom community educators that work directly with students. They're going to be the ones trained. Completion date by November of 2014. The person responsible is the HIV coordinator. Resources required, training supplies, resources, curriculum. And in some cases, you could also, if you had to, you could training site, training facilities, that kind of thing, because that is a resource that you would need if you did not have access to one. Measure of accomplishment, the number of people that were trained in the curriculum. Again, that's your sign-in sheet, your registration sheets, a pre and post training evaluation of knowledge and skill level before and after the training. That's a level of evaluation. And then teachers or community members implementing the curriculum. Of those that were trained, how many are actually implementing it with students? And then, because that will give you numbers as well. That's an example of one type of a template. Here's another one. It's a little more involved, but basically the same information is provided. It's filled out for the water station goal to increase access for water for school-age children. And then there's your objective. This one has a rationale for the objective. Measures for completing the objective. This is in a different location, but it's basically the same as the other one. Measures of accomplishing the objective. You've got your filling stations installed, the number of students, assessing the water filling stations, and observation and documentations of who's using the water fountains at various times in the day. Program activities in support of the objective. Now, the objective is to collaborate with coalition members to secure grant funds. So the programs for that, to support that, would be write for a grant for the filling station, get district support for installing the station, water stations in the schools, work with the students, teachers, and community to identify which buildings best need the water stations for now, and then submit a student survey on the current water use. And this school district was going to do it by SurveyMonkey. And so you've got student input on that. And so there's a data collection right there. So this is just a different example to show your work plan on a one-pager. This will not take the place of you having to write your 5 or 10 pages of your work plan to be explain really what you're going to be doing. But so that's your work plans kind of in a nutshell. The next part, the last part, will be completing a budget.